Okay, let's start by making a very simple gun. We'll start with a cylinder, and we're going to use very bad modeling technique throughout. Alright, so making a gun is actually pretty simple if you don't care what kind of gun you're making. Okay, the smaller parts of the barrel, extrude the region and then scale it and hold down Shift Z, and so it won't scale on the Z axis. And then you can scale Z separately if you want it different like that. And then we'll just make this bottom piece just a little bit smaller there. So there's a gun barrel. Very simple. Alright, so let's go here and add a circle, which we will turn into a cylinder. Rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees, bring it down. And this is just the simplest gun that I could think of that will serve the purposes of this tutorial. So go in here, eliminate all the faces below the center, grab the two edges, extrude them down on the z-axis, about to there. Extrude everything out on the y-axis. And then, in keeping with the horrible modeling technique, I'm just going to duplicate this and roughly line it up over here. There are about 10 different ways you could do this exactly, but I'm not going to bother. And then look at it from the top again. We're just going to add one more cylinder there. And this will just be the turret, so the gun can pivot on the z-axis as well as the y-axis. And that should be good. Okay, so bevel these. Not really necessary, but there you go. Okay, that's the entire gun right there that we're going to be doing. As you can see, there's a lot of room for improvement, but I'm not very interested in improving it. So let's go ahead and make everything smooth. And then we will add an edge split. Actually, first let's join these two, because they're the same object. Add modifier edge split. Okay, now you can see in here, sometimes Blender thinks that edges are sharp when they're actually not supposed to be. And sometimes it's because your normals are facing the wrong way or you have duplicate vertices, but even when you fix that, sometimes the computer just isn't smart enough. So what you do is you just go select sharp edges and then just keep the default 135 degrees, select OK, and you can see here how it's highlighted. It thinks that's sharp for some reason because it's not smart enough, so you just deselect that. Then you go down here to your edge split modifier and you deselect the from edge angle, and then you go up here, hit Control E, mark sharp, and problem solved. So do the same thing with the gun, and there you go. So let's just add a plane really quick, and this will simulate the ground or the ship or whatever the gun's sitting on. Alright. There you go, and that's everything. Let's make everything a little bit smaller. And then the last thing we need to add is just an empty. I'll make it a, let's see, it doesn't matter what it looks like, but I'll make it look like plane axes, and we'll label it gun target. And since we're labeling things, let's label this ground, and we'll call this turret, and we'll call this barrel. There we go. So that's all the objects that you need. Let's go ahead and hit Control A, and that'll apply the scale and rotation to all of your object data, so later on you won't be rotating things around strange axes that you can't explain. And as far as rotation goes, you can see that the turret already rotates correctly on the z-axis, right on the center point. But the natural center point for the barrel is not the point where we want the barrel to rotate at. You can see it rotates in the middle like that. So what we're going to do to fix this is go into the turret and select these two opposing vertices. Hit Shift S, cursor to selection, and now the cursor is located directly where we want the gun barrel to spin at. So you reselect the gun barrel and you go down to your mesh tools and you hit center cursor. And now when you rotate that on the y-axis, you can see it rotates properly. Okay, and so that's everything that you need in order to start moving on to the next step. Okay, so here we are again. Okay, so the next step is to set up some constraints and actually the tracking mechanism. Now the first thing you want to do, and this seems a little counterintuitive, but you want to go ahead and parent the turret to the barrel. And that might seem like it's wrong. You might think that in real life a barrel is part of a gun, but because of the way we're going to be tracking it, you do the opposite. So you click the turret, then you click the barrel, and you hit Control P, make parent. There you go. So now, whenever this rotates or moves around, the turret comes with it. Okay? So now the next thing we need to do is actually make the barrel track to our gun target. So you click the barrel, and you click the gun target, you hit Control T, track to, and you can see it's done some funky stuff here, but that's okay, because basically it is tracking it. It's not pointing the way we want it to point, and it's not, it's moving too much in the wrong directions, but it is following the gun target around the screen, as you can see. So all we have to do is make a few little adjustments. We'll click on the gun barrel here, and I'm down in my constraints section, and I've already played with this quite a bit so I know what we need to do. In this case, we need to put -X and then leave the orientation on Z, but depending on which alignment axis you pick, it'll orient your object in all kinds of different ways. And so you really just need to play with it till you get it pointing the way you want. So now you can see we've got it pointing the right way. The gun barrel is actually pointing at the gun target, and it is tracking it all around the screen. Now the first thing you'll notice is our turret here is looking all funky because it's only supposed to rotate on the Z axis, but here it's rotating on the X and Y as well. So we're going to pick that, and first thing we're going to do is go in here and limit the rotation. On the X and the Y, it's going to be completely 0. It's not allowed to rotate on those axes. So we'll grab this, and it's looking a little better. But now, when we go to the top view, you can see it's actually pulling the gun turret physically around the screen. It's kind of hard to tell from there, but watch it go up and down as this does. See? So what we want to do is limit the location of this as well as the rotation. And we're just going to make everything 0. There you go. So now you've got it locked in, and the gun turret behaves correctly. Cool, and it looks like we're done, except there's one more little problem. Now we're assuming that this is the ground here, and maybe this is an aircraft that's flying around that we're shooting at. Well, this works great as long as the aircraft is in the air, but let's say, for example, there's a cliff over here, and the airplane flies down into this kind of valley. Well, watch the gun. Now the gun is still tracking the object. And in fact, it's now actually pointing down through the ground. I need to move the ground up a little bit. But we need to tell it that yes, you can rotate on the y-axis because that's how the gun works. But if we get to a certain point where it looks like you're going to be pointing into the ground, you need to stop. And there are a couple ways to solve this problem, but we're just going to pick the easy one. And we're simply going to go here to our barrel, and we're going to put a limit rotation on the y-axis with a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 180 degrees. So that will let the gun barrel rotate over a full 180 degrees, but it will stop it, see, before it hits the ground. Okay, so those are the modifiers and the actual tracking mechanism, or the constraints in the tracking mechanism that we need. So the next thing we're going to do is set up a particle system to actually shoot at this target. Okay, welcome to the last section here. This is about actually firing at the target. So what I did first is really simple. Okay, I just animated the target moving across the screen. All I did is I went to frame 0, put it where I wanted it, I hit the I key, insert, location, rotation, there, and then I dragged it across the screen. Well, first I went to frame 100, dragged it to where I wanted it, insert, location, rotation, and that's all there is to that. Okay, so you can see it move across the screen. If you need help with the basic animations, there's plenty of tutorials and references for that. So we're not going to get into that here. Now the the emitter itself, which is just a really small plane that I've created, I made it flush with the gun itself, and I parented it to the gun, so it just follows the gun wherever it's pointing. And this is the thing that actually shoots. Now this needs a particle system, which I have down here, and you can see this. All you do is you hit this. I forget the name of these things, I really should know them by now, but that, and then you hit this one right here, that's your particles tab. Here's your new particle system. So it's emitter type. I'm firing 15 particles, starting at frame 1, ending at frame 100. They stay on screen for 100 frames, and I've just gone ahead and sent a normal of neg40. That's the speed that they fly away from the emitter, and the negative just means which direction they fly away from the emitter at. And because I happen to position the plane backwards, I guess you could say, when I created it, I just hit negative down here and it's fine. That's really all there is to it. Now, there's options I didn't use, like you could add gravity by playing with the acceleration on the z-axis and the global effects or whatever. But like I said, it's really simple animation, so I didn't do too much. Now the default option for visualization is point. So as you watch it, you can see, I hope the resolution on the final video is good enough. You can see it's actually just firing points at the gun target as the gun target moves across the screen. And that's fine if that's what you want. But personally, I wanted to create a projectile. Looked sort of like a small cannonball that fired at this gun target. So the first thing you do is you do object. Now I've already created this object. It's projectile was what I named it. And I put it on this other layer. And let me talk to you guys about that real quick. When you build projectiles, there's a couple things you need to keep in mind. First of all, put them on another layer, because you don't want them to show up just kind of floating in the middle of your scene. Now in this case, it would be right in the middle of this gun, and you wouldn't see it anyway, but the gun might be attached to an aircraft or a ship of some kind. It might be moving, and then you just have this random projectile, just sitting in the middle of your scene. So put it on another layer. Even if you do that, it'll still show up. In other words, if you have the projectile on this layer and the emitter on this layer, it'll still show up in your final render, even if you only have this layer selected. Hopefully you followed that. The next thing to keep in mind is this has to be exactly a 0 on all three axes. Okay, because if it's not, then the emitter will actually, the projectile will actually be offset from the emitter a little bit if it's not at 0. And that's going to look kind of goofy. The last thing to keep in mind is your polygon count. And if you take a normal aircraft or ship or really any kind of object that you're building, say you make it 5,000 faces. Well, that's really nothing to a modern computer to have an object that's 5,000 faces. It's no big deal. But you just remember that you're going to have a lot of these potentially. So if you have a gun that's shooting and you have 100 projectiles on screen and you have 5,000 faces assigned to each projectile, now you've got 500,000 faces, which is 500,000, and it's going to really slow you down when you go to render and animate. And if you start having multiple guns, you could easily get millions of faces on your screen just from the bullets. So keep the polygon count pretty low. Okay, and so what I did, let me get back to this. I just set that to object there, and I put in the name of the object. So when I reset this back to the beginning, there you go. So now you're shooting. Let me zoom in on the gun a little bit here. Instead of particles, you're actually shooting your projectiles that you created as it moves across the screen. Okay? Alright, well I guess that's all I have for this. There's a lot of other things we could have done, a lot of other things we could have covered. But that's the basics, and I'm sure you guys will do far more interesting things than we did here. So feel free to shoot me a message if you guys have any questions, and thanks for watching.